All right. So, um, as I started to tell you, um, the the approach that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa uh, took was an approach of natural as opposed to an organizational way. Now,
Hmm.
most educational systems throughout the world are set up in an organizational way. In other words, you go to first grade first, and then you go to second grade, and then you go to third grade, and then you go to fourth grade. And by the time all of those students who have done those four grades, there's beginning to be real diversity in there. And so they have to set up all kinds of extra programs like special eds and whatnot like that, where in fact the whole idea, it actually seems to be something like the herd mentality is let's put the kids all in a herd and herd them all in the same direction. And I don't think that the kids themselves like that very much. Each one of them would prefer to deal with what's happening for that child right now. And so this is more the natural method. But the natural method, then, we look at it from the perspective is that unlike some meditation systems that run with that organized way, and in fact, some of them will say that they start doing retreats, they assume that everyone who's doing the retreat is a beginner. And so they keep doing retreats for beginners. And so by doing it that way, they don't give the beginner everything that they need. They only give them what they need in the beginning. To where the natural method, we deal with any and everything that comes up, so that the student gets used to handling everything. If they can handle anything with this technique of the Buddha of the Eightfold Noble Path, then they can handle anything.
Yeah, I think we talked about how like these are universal rules. Like I've asked you like, how do I deal with this particular emotion? And you're like, no, it's the same way that you deal with anything else.
Right. And that has to do with that little sequence of events. So we got to wake up, we got to take a look at what's going on. We
Hmm.
have to make a kind of a judgment. Is this thought worth having or not? And
Hmm.
then if it's not worth having, we throw that out and we substitute it with something that is worth having. Now, if we expand the word thought from merely the internal dialogue within the mind into whatever the mind is doing, expand it that way. So, in fact, if we are, how to say it, if we are watching an itch, in other words, if an itch becomes predominant so that it's in the foreground, then basically we say we're thinking itch as opposed to thinking about the itch, because about's going to go all over the place. But when you're actually just watching that sensation, that's the thought.
Yeah.
Okay. So when we expand the concept of thought, we recognize, okay, well, this technique then works by using the word thought, because whatever is happening, if we investigate it to check it out to see if it's wholesome or not, then we can dispense with it, whatever it is. And that mostly for people, eventually, it becomes emotions. That we have to learn to deal with our emotions, but we deal with the emotions exactly the same way that we've been dealing with any other kind of thought. So in that regard, we're put. If someone is sitting and feeling bad, then much of their thinking is in the feeling bad. There's also some dialogue that's going on with that, but most of it is actually that we're experiencing in that moment is the emotion. And so if we can wake up to recognize what we're feeling, generally what's happening is that emotions are sometimes quite intense. But most of the times, the emotions are almost subconscious in the sense that they don't quite come up to our understanding of uh, the surface. So they're deeper than that. And yet, when we're sitting in meditation, if that's what you want to call it, then by watching and by let's say developing the skills, we begin to get in touch with those things that we used to not see so much. And those things can be all kinds of things. Some students will say, "Oh, I've got a lot of tension in my forehead." And
Yeah, but
that
it's they
right.
don't have the tension. It's they're thinking about the
Mhm.
tension.
Right. And so he's thinking about the tension, and he's possibly put that tension there because of the kinds of thoughts that he's been having. So those thoughts and feelings come come together. Tightness in the body, and a way of kind of thinking about it is that yes, we are an integrated whole, but that integrated whole has various aspects to it, and we can deal with these various aspects individually. The
Yeah.
body, the feelings, the mind, and the mind's objects. Okay, so in the way of the mind's objects, um, the Satipatthana works with that in a very interesting way, in the sense that it gives a list of things that can be objects of the mind. And the first thing that it starts off with naturally is going to be hindrances. That's what's going to be occupying the mind. And so we get to know these hindrances as hindrances and we begin to throw them out. So that means that now we're going to have something new in the mind, something more wholesome. And that in fact, in the Satipatthana Sutta, at this point is where it starts talking about um, the actual Dhamma of the Buddha, in the sense of it's very wholesome to think about the five aggregates. It's very wholesome to think about the Four Noble Truths and the Four Noble Path. And yet
Mhm.
in the Anapanasati Sutta, it says it differently. And that is in the sense of that yes, the hindrances are there and the hindrances are to be dealt with, but that we practice anapanasati for the fulfillment of the four foundations of mindfulness, which is the satipatthana, which is what we're getting there. But then once the satipatthana is fulfilled, that satipatthana is fulfilled for the seven factors of enlightenment, the sambojana. All right. But the sambojana is the fulfillment of the Eightfold Noble Path. And if
Mhm.
you look at it item by item as they're listed, yes, you can see that.
Okay, so Sambojana is the fulfillment of the Eightfold Path, and that's the seven factors of enlightenment. Enlightenment.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so that makes sense. And so, like, yeah, if you follow the Eightfold Path, then you are working on cultivating each of these seven factors, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then you said there were four factors of Anapanasati, or what were the four? What was the?
The four skills to be developed in the Eightfold Noble Path are all listed in that
Okay,
same, basically that same order in the
gotcha.
Sambojana. All right.
So that
And that is right view. And that right view has always the quality of looking, of viewing, of
yeah.
investigating. A lot of people have the idea that that right noble view is something like a world view, but it's not. That's an attitude. A world view is an
This is
attitude
just
about
a
the
view
world.
into our own mind,
Hmm.
kind of. Yeah,
Yeah,
we're
kind of asking big questions. The world view is the answer of this is what I think of the world, and this is how I respond to it, in a really big way. to where right noble view is actually in this moment looking at what's really going on.
Yeah.
And it really is investigation. And that, in fact, that quality of investigation um, is actually defined as right noble view in the 117.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we actually have this investigation that we're going to continuously do. When do we do it? When we remember to do it. We wake up and take a look.
Yeah.
That's basically what is going on. So, um, when those things are fully developed in the Sambhojana, that means that uh, we begin to wake up on a regular basis. Sati comes on a regular basis. In fact, the word that Bhikkhu Bodhi chose to use is unremitting.
Unremitting. Okay, so it's a
Un,
constant,
uh-huh,
constant
un,
sati.
un, unremitting in the sense that it doesn't mean that it's all the time,
But you're
but that
constantly reminding yourself.
it keeps coming back.
Okay,
It
yeah.
keeps coming
Oh,
back.
unremitting. Yeah, it keeps coming
Yeah,
back. That makes
it
sense.
keeps coming back. Okay, so you can think of it in the sense of hurricanes. In hurricane season, New Orleans doesn't have a hurricane all the time,
Mm-hmm.
but they keep coming back.
Yeah, they're unremitting. Yeah, that makes sense.
Unremitting.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is what we're meaning by unremitting sati, is that we've trained that sati enough so that it keeps coming back, and it comes back when we need it the most.
Hmm.
Okay, so with the Satipatthana and the understanding the way that the Satipatthana Sutta is set up in relationship to Anapanasati, that gives us an idea of what we should be doing with our time that could be considered wholesome. All right, because actually anything that's happening in the here now, as opposed to in the past and the future, is automatically more wholesome.
Okay. I guess to clarify that, so anything you said, anything in the here now is wholesome. Or and
I didn't
so
say everything that's in the here now is wholesome. I said that
okay.
that things are more likely to be wholesome in the here now than they are if we're dwelling in the past and in the future.
Okay, so I guess the question I'd ask is like, if I'm in the here now, can I be in discomfort or comfort? Or like, can I, uh, yeah, so like if I feel like a tightness in my chest and it's like an uncomfortable tightness in my chest, am I not in the here now if there is discomfort associated with that? Or like, would I be in the here now? Like, if I was in the here now, would I be able to see its components so I wouldn't be
Uh,
in discomfort?
well, let's say that in the here now that the body is in pain. That would be one of those things because when the body is in pain, that it's not comfortable. That could be an itch, or it could be a disease. It could be anything, but that we disturb our comfort when that itch is there. But that doesn't mean that we have to pay full attention to that itch.
Yes.
That in fact, if it basically has to do with the quality of out of sight, out of mind, um, that this is part of the training that is done mostly in Burmese, in the Burmese traditions, and also with Goenka, of having the students sit for a long time in strong determination sittings with the idea that the body is going to get tired, it's going to have a strain of getting the blood circulation correct. The legs will go to sleep, all kinds of things. And that the idea, and it's only an idea now, is that the students know that while they're sitting there for long periods of time, that they're intentionally bringing up these sensations so that they can play a game with them. And that these sensations on their own are harmless. We have come to find out that's not true. I can
Yeah.
name you 5 or more monks and people that I know of who can't sit on the floor anymore because they have messed up their knees because they've worked too hard. Palo was the first one that we knew of for sure. He was an Australian monk. Uh, Subhato, who is in Malaysia. Dhammarato can't sit anymore. There's a number of monks who get themselves because they work too hard at it. And so this is a kind of a dangerous technique that I don't recommend, but rather to understand that whatever sensations that the body presents us with, there is a game that we can play with that sensation. And that there are also other things that we can do. An example of that is, well, I'll give you this example and I'll go ahead and let you in on it. In 1991, I was in, January the 6th, 1991, I was in a bike accident and broke a rib, and that rib has never healed. And so from time to time, it will get dislodged. And then it'll pop back into shape. In fact, I can deep breathe and dislodge it.
Oh, God.
But sometimes it causes a sharp, intense pain. But I know exactly what to do with that pain. And that is that I can generally, what I can do is I can raise my arm really high like that in the air, and that will reset that bone. And sometimes I'll even grab onto something that's very high and then pull down on it to put as much weight on that as I can, and that will help reset that bone.
But you're not suffering. You're not thinking about how awful this is that your ribs dislodge. It's like, oh, like there's pain there. I know what to do.
There's that sensation that just shows that the bone is not set right. Let me put it back into place. And sometimes it takes a while for it to do that, for it to settle down. And I might have to try several different techniques, but I can deal with it without going into having a pity party, oh, poor me, or get worried, or some people would even go so far as to schedule surgery.
Yeah, you're not ruminating over it. It's just like...
You're the first person that I've told about it. Let us say I had a student who was here in 2016, and I told him because he saw it happen.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And so I told him about it. But what I'm doing with you is I'm pointing out that a pain or a sensation can easily be dealt with if it's just a happening or just a toy to play with.
Yeah.
And that breathing and manipulating it. So we talk about it in the sense of hide and go seek. Also, you've heard that game that children play.
Hide and go seek, yeah.
Hide and go seek, except that we're going to play the game backwards. First, we're going to go seek out that sensation or that pain. Pay very, very close attention to it, exactly where it is. What we've come to understand through neuroscience is that those nerve endings that cause that sensation or make that chemical noise is not just one nerve cell in one place. That there are all over that area. And so if, let us say that you had a pain right here on the arm and you were looking at that pain, perhaps it's on the leg. And if I look at it exactly right there, I recognize, wait a minute, it doesn't hurt right there. It hurts someplace else. Let me look here. And let me look over here. And let me look there and around. And I begin to recognize that the pain is moving just slightly out of my field of direct, intense investigation.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So the pain's moving out of the one location. It's not just in
It's
the
not
cut.
just right here, right? When I
Yeah.
look at it right there, it feels like it is someplace else, and so I begin to move around. This is what we're talking about of seeking it out.
Yeah, and if you
Get
seeked it out, like even if you went deeper, I mean, like, would you see that like that is it's also composed of a whole bunch of it's not one thing. It's like temperature, it's pressure, it's a whole bunch of disparate
hmm
like little feelings that become like a mind object that feels like a single thing.
Yes, exactly. All right. So we begin to recognize that this thing is not as big and as powerful and as important as it was. That what made it big and powerful and important was is that I hated it and I
Hmm.
wanted to get rid of it. Now we're already automatically out of that frame of reference because we're in the frame of reference of investigation. I don't hate it anymore. Now I'm just looking.
Yeah, I see. Yeah,
Uh,
you're not like there's not a self that's like pointing it out. There's a self that's like investigating, or maybe not a self, but
mhm.
there's something investigating that, or
Right.
like we're
Well,
looking around,
the
investigating, seeing
investigation
what
is
it's
going
composed
on.
of. We're not just like, oh, I'm in pain, my arm hurts. Like it's a different attitude.
Completely different attitude about it. Okay.
Yeah.
Now we're just investigating sensation.
Hmm.
That in fact the word pain is a mental object.
Hmm.
It's not the physical pain. That in fact is hard. It's even hard to talk about it because our language is messed up.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about the sensation in the body as a sensation in the body. And when I don't like it, perhaps because it's a very sharp sensation,
Hmm.
or maybe a dull sensation, or perhaps it's associated with blood pressure and it's a throbbing sensation. But whatever the sensation is, it's just a sensation, and you could also say that it is a communication, that that part of the body is trying to communicate with the brain that something is not right here. An example of that is someone who's got a broken arm and their arm's in a cast. And every time they move the arm, it hurts. What does that mean? It means leave me alone and let me be still so I can mend this bone. And so we actually begin to see that kind of pain inside the cast as a useful thing. Because if we don't pay attention to that pain, then the bone's not going to heal.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
Yeah,
like so it's communicating to you. It's like, hey, don't move this arm. And
mm-hmm.
then, yeah, like when we're thinking like, oh my gosh, my arms are like, yeah, that's going to keep us from moving our arm. That makes sense. And so, yeah, so I guess like I just had so like when we have that pain, like I guess there's some sort of a mind object that is pain, right? That's what we're
Mm-hmm.
saying. Um, and then I guess I was thinking about the sense doors, and I guess I was trying to think like, do we ever really see those, or do we only see the mind object? Like if I sit down and do my investigation, like am I looking at the mind objects, or like am I actually even like, or is there
That's a
what?
very complicated question. And the answer is sometimes yes and sometimes no.
Okay.
That in fact, when we make a deeper investigation into Paticca Samuppada, is when exactly you'll get the answer to that
Okay.
question. All right.
Okay.
But kind of the point is that whenever we have and we're talking about the touch sensation, we can actually see something that can be called an eyesore, something so ugly,
Yeah.
okay, um, that that we have the same kind of reaction as if there was a sore on the skin,
Hmm.
okay, a kind of repulsion. That's mental.
Hmm.
And that the eyesore, is only an eyesore when someone looks at it and feels like it's an eyesore. When that person is not looking at it directly with the eyes and also not thinking about it, then it's not an eyesore. It's just an object. That what made it an eyesore was someone thought that it was painful, that it was
Yeah.
sore. All right. So the same thing is true with the sore on the body, or that itch, or that broken bone, or that whatever sensation is there. And that is that this is the part of the hide and go seek part that we were talking about in reverse. The first thing is we do is we really check it out. We do an investigation. We notice it very well. And then the next side of it is that now we're going to avoid it completely. We're going to not think about it. We're going to throw it out of the mind. We're literally going to go someplace else with the mind.
Yeah.
A way to talk about it is to ignore that pain, to get it out of the mind and come back.
So if we took, I don't know, I guess like hot plate.
Everybody's capable of doing this to a certain degree.
Yeah, I believe you. Yeah, I guess so I guess my question would be like, so say, okay, yeah, pain or like, I don't know, something, yeah, there's like some pain, mental object, and we do our investigation and we notice this is like, I don't know, like a couple things, or I don't know, what if so when you say forget, what if we thought that pain isn't there? Like, what if we thought it had like, maybe one of the qualities of that pain is like pressure or something like that.
Okay.
And what if we thought about spaciousness in that location? Or like instead of thinking,
I
well, I
would
guess,
call that playing with it.
okay.
To pay attention to it, to play with it, to try to
So that'd be paying
manipulate
attention to it. Okay,
Right.
yeah. You
Pay
don't want to do
attention
that.
to. Yes, you do.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yes, but you want to do it in cycles.
Hmm.
In the sense that there's going to be a time when you really pay attention to it, when you really pay attention and play with it, see if you can move the pain around. If it's in the chest area, you can use the breath to breathe into it. All kinds of different possibilities with that. And then later is we're going to hide from it. We're going to ignore it. We're going to not pay attention to it. We're going to take it out of our consciousness. An example of that would be a mosquito bite that in the beginning, you're going to make sure that you don't scratch it.
Hmm.
So this takes some mindfulness because normally people scratch whatever itches there are kind of mindlessly while they're focusing on something else. So what we do with that mosquito bite is, no, I'm going to directly focus on it. I'm going to look at it. Literally, I'm going to think about it. I'm going to experience it fully, and then later I'm going to completely ignore it. Even though the sensations haven't really changed, my perception of those sensations have changed completely.
Yeah, we've changed our attitude towards it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, by like playing with it, that puts us in
You're
a,
right. You're developing the right attitude about this instead of the attitude of poor me with that mosquito bite and I hate it and I wish it would go away, into, yeah, I can see that. And now I can disregard it. That's much more of a winner's attitude, precisely.
yeah.
All right. So, in the sense of pains and situations like this, these things come and go, and we're practicing with them exactly the same way that we're working with the hindrances, except that the investigation that we do with many of the, let us say, the verbal thoughts that we have, we can actually see very quickly that that's dukkha and that it can be thrown out.
Mm-hmm.
All right, with the sensations, we're going to look at them a little bit more because in fact what we're actually looking at in a way is the fact that we don't like it. And we're changing that. We're not changing the sensation. We're not changing the sensual input, but we're changing the way that we perceive it.
Yeah.
By investigating it, by looking at it, by changing the way we feel about it intentionally.
Yeah, like, yeah, if you can play with it and your perception shifts, then like that kind of clues you into the nature of it, or like
Mhm.
how much value it has, which I guess would be like,
And by doing so, we develop very, very slowly in layers over time. We develop the attitude, I can handle anything.
hmm,
Hey, at one time I felt that this sensation was so sharp that it was unbearable. My, how things are really going to get bad someday later.
yeah,
Into, hey, this one ain't so bad. I can handle this one too.
yeah, you develop that winner's attitude. The like,
You
yeah, I can do
develop
this.
that winner's
Yeah,
attitude through this method of hide and go seek that we're talking about, that we can begin to handle any sensation.
yeah,
And so with that, we're also looking at it in this way. Once the hindrances in the Satipatthana Sutta, it has this in order that the next thing that we're going to be investigating is the five aggregates,
hmm,
which is in fact what we're already kind of doing with this pain thing. But the number one point about the aggregates, and I'll give you each one. Actually, I'll give you the whole group, and then we'll talk about each one individually because there's a major reason why these aggregates are there. All right. The aggregates are, in fact, aligned with the four foundations of mindfulness, except that we're looking at the same thing in a different way. The first part of the five aggregates is body. Well, body is there in the Anapanasati Sutta, it's in the Satipatthana. We got that one, we know what that one is. But one of the qualities that we're looking for within the five aggregates is the body is not the self. That's not what I am or who I am. And that's fairly easy to be seen because the body that you've got now is not the same body you had when you were 6 years old,
hmm,
nor will it be the same body that you'll have when you're my age.
yeah,
It's just not the same. It changes over time. It's not a fixed item, it's not a self. What we mean by the way of self is the quality of uh, inherently the same thing. A much better word that we could have used in the translations. And I'm very, very surprised because, as we pointed out before, that it was Christian translators that were translating the Pali into English. Why this one word that's causing so many people so much trouble in the English language is simply because of a very small translation error. That these Christian translations should have translated atta and anatta, not as self and no self, but soul and no soul. Why? Because the idea of a soul is that it's permanent.
there's something that's the same about me from the moment I was born to the time I die, or something like that, right?
Your
Like that,
eternal
there's a
soul,
story,
or
an overarching
your
story of like me, I don't know, going to college and all that stuff. Yeah.
well, this is not only a concept that's built into the modern religions of the day, most specifically Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, with the monotheistic religions, but they're monotheist, or the monotheo, the God itself, also is a soul, everlasting, and everlasting in the sense of unchanging, which meant if he was a villain who was doing genocide in Jericho, then he's still a villain doing genocide on the streets of Poughkeepsie.
Yeah.
The God is the God, it doesn't change.
Mm.
All right. And yet, Jesus comes along and says, oh no, God's love. Well, that means automatically that God's able to change. So God itself is not even a soul.
Mm, that's true. Yeah. I mean, I see what you're getting at. I guess like the argument there would be that, well, yeah, I mean, I'm not going to argue it there, but you could be like, yeah, it's like a, whatchamacallit, outside of time, like a God sort of like outside of time, kind of like beyond comprehension sort of deal. So kind of hand-wave that, like,
No, the reason why people put it outside of time and space and beyond comprehension is because they've made the darn thing up and it does not fit any of the test and realities.
mhm.
The fact is, it is actually quite easy for the beginning Buddhist student to see that they don't have a soul, but they will wonder for years about, is there a self or not? And the
No
reason
soul,
for
but
that,
is there a self or not?
right, is there, am I,
Why would they wonder about that?
well, everyone falls into the trap, I think, therefore I am.
Yeah.
Descartes, or Descartes, rather, he made that mistake.
Mm-hmm.
The more correct mistake, or the more, excuse me, the more correct way to say it is, I think, therefore I think I am.
Hmm.
That the I am, is a thought. But the reality is that the body is not that soul. The body is not that self. In fact, none of the aggregates are. So this is the point in the teachings of the Buddha where the Satipatthana becomes the five aggregates. And the five aggregates in order are the body, the feeling, perception, sankhara, and consciousness. Some people put it as
Body.
consciousness, perception, and sankhara.
Okay, so there's the body, the feeling, the perception.
And the mind is broken into three groups in the sense of how the mind works.
Okay.
All right. So we can think of it like this.
That's what is
That
self. Those are the components of self, would be like these five aggregates.
these five aggregates are our entire sum of our own personality.
Mm-hmm.
The way we see things, our old past, the way we feel, and the body that we walk around in is our personality.
Mm-hmm.
And the body that we have has various trainings and various skills that it has developed. Um, for instance, if a large plastic fish this long was thrown at you from the side, you might not be able to catch it. But a football player who is an all-star champion, Heisman Trophy winner, if you throw that fish at him, more than likely he'll catch it.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because he's been catching odd-shaped objects like footballs for many years, one time after another, after another, after another. He knows how to do it.
Yeah.
Okay, so in that regard, the body that we have is a sum total of all of the skills and things that have happened to it, but that it is not who you are. You are
Yeah.
not the body. The
Yeah.
body
I see that. Yeah.
changes. And if the body changes, then who you are would also have to change.
Yeah.
Whatever that you are that's associated with the body.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Like, I mean, if you change any of the five aggregates, it's probably going to be like a different self on the other end,
Right.
and
So
what they're constantly in flux.
so these five aggregates that make up the personality um, is what then gives us the view, almost the world view, of who am I. And the Christians, they all have an idea about who each one is. There's an eternal soul, etc. You know, the whole show. Um, Original sin, the whole nine yards of it. And everybody's got a kind of an idea. This is who I am. This is me. Okay. Except that what we're not doing is we're not doing a full enough investigation to recognize that that me that we're talking about is in constant flux.
Mm-hmm.
It's constantly changing. And yet, whenever one of those changes comes up, then we attach to that as me.
Yeah.
All right. Here's how we do that. In fact, it's built right into our language. It's so common that it's built into the language in the sense of I'm frustrated, I'm angry, I'm sad. No, you're not frustrated, you're not angry, and you're not sad. But let us just take one of those as the example of angry or frustration. Yes, there is anger there, and it is the predominant feeling, but you're not your feelings. Anger is there, but you are not the anger. This is
Yeah.
part of what we're doing with Anapanasati, is to wake up to see I am not my thoughts, I am not my feelings, I am not my body.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's like it's our perception, or like it's the, I don't know, the mental objects arrange themselves in a way to like make us self-present. And I don't know, like, I guess like there's some like awareness, and then like whatever the things that arise in that. And like, I mean, we can tend to kind of like prune that garden and like have different perceptions. I mean, that's kind of what we've been talking about a little bit. So yeah, it would make sense if you like, because we can kind of like change ourself, or like whatever our perception is or outlook, that would like, yeah, there's no persistent self. Sorry, those are kind of rambling. But yeah, there's an amount of ingredients, these like 5 aggregates that go into like who we think of as ourself. And yeah, if we like change those, which it sounds like we're kind of like doing, we're shifting by following the Eightfold Path, then that sense of self would change.
Right. Because the number one point of the teaching of the Buddha, and Bhikkhu Buddhadasa in one of his talks that wound up in Lion's Roar he makes the point that the entire teaching of the Buddha is that you can change. Whereas the predominant, absolutely number one vital but unspoken teaching of Christianity is you can't change. You've got an original sin, and you continue to sin, and the big guy in the sky is going to come after your butt unless you suck up to him.
Yeah,
Okay.
that is true for a lot. I mean, yeah, that's the perception a lot of people have.
Okay. So this is the problem then that humanity has when it comes to that, is that we think that it's hard to change, or difficult, or even impossible to change. People who have and let us say a known addiction, for instance, dropping that addiction for them is very, very hard because it's supposed to be hard.
Yeah, they think it's hard. They think
And
they want it really bad.
well, on that regard, what we need to do is recognize, guess what? Everybody's addicted. We all
Yeah.
are addicted.
Yeah, I'm addicted to
The
the
question is, are you
personality
going
that
to be addicted to something wholesome, or are you going to be addicted to something unwholesome?
yeah.
And it's that easy. When you recognize it is that easy, we can begin to unaddict ourselves to the unwholesome and start addicting ourselves to the wholesome. We can change. We do not have to go by the old karma, the old way of doing things.
Yeah, so we do our investigation, we look at the thoughts we have, or like we look at the thoughts, and by thoughts we don't just mean verbal thoughts. That could be like, I don't know, which sound thoughts, or like or any sense door thought or whatever it's called. I don't know, like touch thought, or whatever sensation thought. We can be like, is this wholesome or unwholesome? If it's unwholesome, maybe we want to play around with it a little bit, like you said, but we want to forget it. We want to let it go if it's unwholesome. We do not want to be attached to that. If it's wholesome, then we want to attach to that.
You could basically say then that there's a two-step process. One is to grab hold of it, and the other one is to throw it out.
Yeah. And so, so grab a hold of it, whether it's throw it out. And so we're investigating, and one of the wholesome things that we can investigate are the 5 aggregates with respect to ourselves.
This is something that needs to be investigated precisely. And it's also the 5 aggregates is kind of a shorthand and the beginning of the teaching of Paticca Samuppada.
So
Now,
do the five,
go ahead.
I guess like I've tried to contemplate like what is myself before, but it's kind of tricky. Is like the five aggregates. Is that just a reasonable way to break it down so that it's easier for us to investigate? Is that one way of looking
Well,
at it, or
yes, but it's easier to break it down that way because it does break down that
because
way,
it
and
does?
it's
Okay, yeah,
easier
sorry,
to
yeah, it
investigate that
does.
way,
Yeah, I see what you mean.
and that it does have a kind of a sequence of events or a sequence of process,
Process,
a
the
process.
investigation, or the
No, the actual events of the mind.
okay, the formation of
How
self
the
as like a
mind works
sequence.
is in a sequence of events.
Yeah.
All right. And so, as we've seen from the second noble truth, that the second noble truth, which is also known as Mara and his three daughters of greed, ill will, and delusion, you can then look at Paticca Samuppada in that way, in the sense that Paticca Samuppada has 12 steps. The first step is ignorance. And the last step, 12, is suffering or dukkha. And that slap
Yeah.
dab in the middle, number 6 and 7, is the Vedana, the feelings that give rise to, the feeling of I like it, I don't like it, or I don't know what to do with it. And the Tanha, which then is the Lobha, the Dosa. Okay.
Tanha's the
So
clinging, right?
right. That's
Yeah.
grasping. The
Grasping.
tanha is the wanting. I gotta have it. I gotta have it. Okay. And then I've got it. I've got it. All right. So this is the tanha in the upadana part. But as you can see, there they are. This is nothing but the second noble truth in its full expansion. And that 5 of the 12 items on this list, in fact, are the 5 aggregates. So always the 5 aggregates should be a basic introduction into Paticca Samuppada. And if we go deep enough into the 5 aggregates, we've almost covered half of Paticca Samuppada.
Oh wow.
And so the first thing that we have to understand is that inherently inside of the feelings, I am not that feeling. There is a feeling of anger when it's there, but it's not me. And yet, the way our language is set up, it's easy to make that mistake that my feelings are me. How I feel is who I am.
Mm-hmm.
No, not at all. How I feel is who I am is because I've had all kinds of feelings, which means that who I am is all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So like you said there's this first step of ignorance. Okay, yeah, never mind. We probably just want to keep talking about the 5 aggregates because that it sounds like if I get wrapped up in the
Hmm.
all the like big 12
Well,
steps, there's a lot of other
the,
questions.
right. The way that we look at this ignorance in the relationship to the Paticca Samuppada is how it affects the Sankara. The
Mhm.
Sankara is the storage of all of the ignorant, stupid things we've done and thought. And so we'll get a little bit more into that next time. The important thing for right now is to recognize that we are not our thoughts, we are not our feelings, and we are not the sensory input itself.
Mhm.
That we're not consciousness in the sense that, first off, I will be giving you over time 2 different definitions of consciousness. But the kind of consciousness that we're talking about now is sense consciousness in the way that when you can see, you know you can see, and that the eye takes an object. The eye
You're
takes an
saying I am
object.
not whatever is collecting and processing sensory data.
Right, that you are not the sight itself.
Yeah, I'm not the site itself. Yeah, I'm not
Mhm.
like the touch or anything like that.
Exactly. That I am not that sensory contact. that I am
That so
not
like
this consciousness.
if I
And
touch the
here's,
wall, that's not me touching the wall. Is that kind of what you're saying? No.
if you touch the wall, or let us say the fingers touch the wall, but the fingers are only giving out a touch sensation, and you are not that sensation. If
Okay.
anything, you're the one who is the observer or the experiencer of that sensation, but even that's a little bit shaky.
Yeah.
All right, but you're not the wall, and you're not the hand, you're not the touch, uh, and the reason for that is that sometimes you can't control the wall. For instance, there are no walls here for me to touch.
Yeah.
That's an important point um, that the Buddha made actually in a sutta number 38. And this is the sutta of the name of it is the Maha Tanha Vibhanga Sutta. And this is called the exposition then on Tanha. And that the Tanha is the grasping, but it all gets started with the hinged on the word consciousness. Sati, the son of a fisherman, had the wrong view that it was his consciousness that ran in circle from life to life, experiencing the results of good and bad actions from the past. That's
Hmm.
exactly the way that they state it. And the Buddha is saying no, that that's not correct. It is not, and yet that's what Hinduism, in fact, if you think about it, that's what Christianity is really on about when they talk about a soul. It's not a soul that would be a hard object. Because when people get to heaven, they have the idea that they're going to be conscious in heaven. Perhaps they're conscious of the gold streets, or maybe they're conscious of the deep fog, or perhaps they're consciousness of the lute players that eat Philadelphia brand cream cheese on bagels. That's
Yeah,
supposed to
because
be
like
heaven.
well, you
But
said the body's part of the five aggregates. Is that what you said?
or at least the senses and the consciousness that comes with those senses.
Yeah. So without those senses or like without that stored in like memory or whatever, then
Mhm.
yeah, like the self that you're talking about right now
Right. So
would not be.
what would a soul be if that soul had no senses and no consciousness? What kind of soul would that be?
So,
Not much.
yeah, I mean, it wouldn't be what I consider me right now. Like, it wouldn't just be like I get teleported somewhere and like everything's groovy.
All right. So now the Buddha's coming by and just say, wait a minute, all this stuff then that everyone, when they thinks of it eternally, going to heaven and into a future life and whatever like that, what do we take with us? We take consciousness and
Mm-hmm.
we take sensory input.
Mm-hmm.
And the Buddha says no. And the reason for that is because, remember, we're talking about a soul here, something that's there all the time, something that's indestructible. And yet, when you're asleep, you're not conscious. Consciousness comes and goes.
Mm-hmm.
You can be looking at something, and then the next minute thinking about something, and then the next minute feeling something, and then the next minute experiencing something else. And so the consciousness is jumping around from object to object. And there's no consistency there. This is the point that the Buddha is making in the first part of this sutta is that consciousness is dependently arising.
Okay, so yeah, like yeah, I was trying to think like yeah, when I'm sleeping, there's no self there. I mean, like maybe if I'm dreaming, but even then, it's going to be a different me dreaming or
But
like in
that's a
that dream
kind of
scenario.
sensory awareness. That's a
So I was
kind of
trying to think
sensory
like yeah,
input.
what's there like if I'm not
And you may
conscious?
not even
And
be
it's
conscious of it. Exactly.
yeah, what's there
Dreams
if you're
are
not
really,
conscious? Because I'd still consider I don't know. That's like
but when you are
me,
asleep,
but
you've got no concept of time.
yeah, it's Yeah, there's no concept of
Okay.
time. You
There's
don't get to.
all right. So there's no consciousness there.
Yeah.
Concept of time has to come because we're conscious of time, the
Hmm.
passage of time. All right. So that just kind of nails it right there. When we do realize that consciousness is dependently arising, that it's not continuous.
Yeah. So I guess like I was reading some like weird Buddhist sites a while ago, and they're all like, but the catch is there's a Gandhava, or like there's a shell that goes from like one lifetime to the next that doesn't carry like any of this like memory, or like it carries
It
karma
doesn't even
somehow.
go from one breath to the next. It
Yeah,
doesn't go
okay.
from one day to the next. How could it possibly go from one lifetime to the next unless we're thinking magically?
Yeah, so you're saying like we're not even it's even sketchy that we're the observer of what's ever going on. Because I guess like when we're sleepy, maybe we turn off our memory, maybe we turn off our sensory inputs. So maybe there's something there that it's just resting and isn't observing anything, but it would still be like considered an observer. Is that
Well, if there is no observing done, then there is no observer. There is a
yeah.
gap. There is an emptiness. There is a nothingness between, and then it arises again.
Yeah, there's like a nothingness that when I don't know, is something arising in that nothingness or like it's I mean, is it nothingness to like 5 + 5 aggregates, then like we're on our way to making like a self or something like that? Or
Hmm.
what is like I guess if there's a nothingness there, then like how does something arise from that?
Well, we actually make a mistake linguistically when we say nothingness is there,
Oh
because
shoot, yeah, I guess you're
that's
right.
not even there. There is no nothingness there. Nothingness is not a thing to be there.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. That what we're talking about is the absence of something or the loss of something. And in this case, there is the loss of consciousness. It comes and it goes and it comes and it goes. And when it's sort of like there's many examples. One would be the ball at a disco that's got mirrors on it, and then the lights are shining while the ball twirls, and it gives the sensory awareness of a strobe light. And that when we first look, we can see the dancers, but we only see the light flash on, and then we see, and then it flashes off, and then it flashes on again, and now it's off. And we think that everything is standing still. But if we begin to connect the dots together so that we can see between the strobes that what I saw this time and what I saw the next time not the same. Things have changed. All right. Let's
So
take
would it
another. Go
hmm,
ahead. All right. Another example, which is quite good. Uh, this comes from my own past. My dad was a projectionist for a couple of years when I was 6 to 8 years old, and that in the movie theater they have the projections and the projector, and the projector has a very very strong light, an arc light, and at the other end it has a fan-like bladed device on a circle, so that half the time the light is shown and half the time the light is not shown, and this thing spins. I think at an RPM of 12 times a second, which allows it to have 24 times of darkness and 24 times of light because it's got, quadrants like this. And so as you move from quadrant to quadrant, you can see the light.
yeah.
But then there is time when you can't see like this, okay? And so it's spinning,
Hmm.
which means the light's on half the time. When the projector is projecting no light to the screen is dark. That's when the film will click to move to the next frame, one picture after another, and then that machine moves into the light so that you can see it, and then it moves to the dark, and now it changes frame.
Hmm.
This is why they called them flicks in the old days, because you could actually hear at a slower speed the flickering. When it's run at 10 to 15 frames a second, you can actually see the frames move if you're paying close attention. By 24, you can't. So people in the 1950s and 60s would go to a movie and pay the fee, but they only got half a movie. Half the
Yeah.
time they sat in the audience, the screen was dark. Someone's coming. Okay. So half the time the screen is dark. Think about that. And yet nobody in the movie theater knows that unless they
Yeah.
go up to the projector and see how this thing is done, and then they recognize, hey, the screen's dark half the time.
Yeah, because we're just not aware of the darkness in between.
But then the delusion sets in. This is a motion picture. And it's not. It's a set of still frames, one after another, and it's not a motion picture at all.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that, because that's your consciousness, and that's the perception of self. When the self is there, we think it's there all the time. And when it's not, we're not thinking about it, we don't see it, and then the self comes up and we think it's there all the time. And when it's not there, it's gone, and we're not thinking about it, and then the self comes back up and we think it's there all the time.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean by it. Dang, that's tricky. But yeah, I wasn't catching. It's like, oh well, like okay, there's like this thing where there's this thing and nothing is and things happen. But you're saying that like we're just not aware when there's not a self, because
Precisely.
because you like if
This
I'm asleep, then I don't register that I'm sleeping. I'm not conscious of sleep.
this is where the concept of sunyata in Buddhism comes from, is that we have to start watching the gaps between. Rather than only focusing on what's there when it's there, we have to also focus on what's not there when it's not there.
Yeah, yeah, and so we can look at the five aggregates because these things are present when there's a self, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
So
so when we can,
basically,
well, I don't know if we could see when they're not there, but
this
could
is normally
investigate.
what happens in the human mind with these five things. First off, I need to give you a definition, and we'll get a very short definition of Sankara and then go into it great detail later. Sankara you can think of as your past. The Sankara is all of the stored feelings and thoughts and experiences that you've had in the present time, so that um, when we think about something, in order to gain understanding, we draw upon this database or this past that we have.
Mhm.
All right. That drawing then upon that is what we call perception. That we take consciousness, we mix it around with the stuff that we've had from the past, and we come up with a new kind of consciousness, which is an internal consciousness, which is our understanding.
Mm.
We could use the word realization, but in fact, we don't realize anything. We mentalize. So if I see that tree out there, I see it and then I call it a tree. By calling it a tree, I've had to go into my database of trees to figure out that this object is actually a tree. It fits that definition of what I have for tree, so I can call it a tree.
Yeah.
All right, that calling it a tree is the perception.
Hmm.
Or let us say figuring out what to call it is perception.
Yeah, it's like when we look, there's some ignorance, then all these processes kick off, and we're like, okay, like recall happens based on our memory
For
banks and
instance, if you
whatever.
were raised in a desert where there were no trees and
You
you
might be like,
never
that's a big
saw a tree,
cactus. Yeah.
you wouldn't know what to do with a tree when you saw it.
Yeah.
So, like this, we base all of our new understanding upon our old past experiences, which are the Sankara. And the three of them come together as what we mean by realization or mentalization of something. Another way of saying it is no one lives in the real world, and it's not possible to live in the real world. It's only possible for dogs and cats and humans to live in a mentally constructed world that each one of us creates for ourselves.
Yeah.
And so we live in a mentally constructed world. That mentally constructed world has all of the features of senses, but it's all inside the mind. It's the picture that we create in the mind. It's, for instance, when we watch a movie, how do we choose who we believe is the villain?
I mean, yeah, whoever
It's
we
because we've got
dislike.
villain data stored in there,
Yeah.
and this guy fits villain, and so we're going to give him the label of villain.
Yeah. So, how frequently do we do that? Like, is this like a?
How fast does it happen is a better
Yeah.
question. It happens really fast.
Okay. Yeah. So
The,
that's how
the
we get the
Buddha
appearance of a
says the
seamless
mind
world.
is so fast, O monks. The Buddha says the mind is so fast, O monks, that he doesn't even have an analogy for how fast the mind is.
Okay. So I'm going through this like cycle or like this process of constructing what's around me or like myself
It
and
can
like the
be
world
thought
around
of a
me.
cycle. They do think of it as a
Or
cycle.
maybe
In
not a
fact,
cycle, but
the
like a step.
Tankas of Tibet have Paticca Samuppada in a cycle, in a wheeled thing. But the better way of looking at it is it's sort of like the dropping of a rock and it hits the ground.
Mm-hmm.
You drop another rock and it hits the ground. You throw another rock and it hits the ground. Okay, what is the throwing of the rock? Is the consciousness that we see something, and when we see it, we try to make sense out of it. Once we've made sense out of it, that's what contacts us, and that's what gives us our feelings.
Okay.
Okay?
So we're doing our investigation. I'm reflecting on the five aggregates. Are the five aggregates, since they're part of the self that we've said there is no self, does that
There
automatically
is
make
no
them
self in
unwholesome?
perception itself. There
So
is
like my
no
idea that this aggregate makes myself, that would be unwholesome. It would be
there's another way of looking at it, and I think that I left out something that I should have said earlier. And that is, if these five aggregates are not the self, then where does the self come from?
okay. Yeah.
And the answer to that is that it comes from the process that these five aggregates kick off and go through, and those would be later steps of Paticca Samuppada.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that would
So it's
basically
like there's something that's later in this process that would then recognize
as the
the
self.
five aggregates, and then it would
Mhm.
kind of kick off that.
Basically, it's within the four modes of clinging.
Mm.
And we'll talk about that later. So, where the self comes from is actually a process of the mind.
Okay.
But the actual components of the mind, individually, each one of them is not the self.
Yes. Oh, okay. I see. It is the aggregate. It's the collection of these that makes the self.
This collection of things, these aggregates, are not the self. Okay, here's an example: a musical instrument, a violin. It's got knurls and it's got knobs and it's got a sounding board and it's got a magical little pin inside of it and it's got a bridge for the strings, and the bridge is arranged in an arc so that the bow can hit each individual string or bear down and hit two of them at a time and things like that. This violin is not music.
Yeah.
It's a violin.
Mm-hmm.
It's not music.
But when you add,
Music can be produced from this violin, but the violin itself is not music.
oh, so you can have all of these aggregates, but that doesn't necessarily make a self. It's when you
It's
add all the components together that it finally makes
even
one.
when you bring all the components together of that violin, it's still not music.
Okay, I see. So if you have 4 of the 5 aggregates, then maybe not self.
Well, there is no self in any of the 5
Oh,
aggregates,
sorry,
but the
aggregates
way
don't have a
the,
self.
right,
Yes.
the 5 aggregates themselves, though, can be manipulated in such a way so that a self, like music, can occur.
Mm-hmm.
That's the important point is that the 5 aggregates themselves, not
Okay.
any one of them, nor in combination, are they you. You
So
are not
you're
the
saying you
body.
could have
You are
all
not
the properties of self, but they aren't self until like something plays them. I guess like the violin.
exactly.
It's not that just the summation equals that. It's there's something else looking at it.
Hmm. And yet, whenever we have a pictorial representation of music, you'll see treble signs and always a violin.
Yeah.
And we picture the violin as music itself. No, the violin is not music itself, just like your body, your feelings, your mind, your consciousness, your perceptions, all of that stuff in combination, your whole personality is still not a self. It's still
Okay.
not a you. Just
So
like
yeah,
that
there's
entire violin put together correctly and fine tuned and everything, it's still not music itself. You are
okay.
not.
So there's this thing that or this there's this other thing that we'll get into later you're saying that kind of like would notice these factors and then cause the rise of the self.
Hmm.
And I guess like that thing is
And when that
attaching to
arises,
those
you
5
call, and the easy way to think of it is when that self does arise, it's called selfishness.
selfishness. Okay.
That instead of talking about there is no self, a better way of saying it is that selfishness is painful.
Hmm.
Selfishness is unsatisfying.
Okay. Yeah. So
And so if we
we
would
want
stay
to
out
change
of
our attitude towards the aggregates. Is that kind of
right. So the attitude for the aggregates is that they are not me. I am not the
yes?
feelings.
Okay. So yeah, if I'm doing my investigation, I would maybe notice these aggregates, and then I would not forget the aggregate, but I would notice my relationship with that. Then that relationship with that aggregate may show that I'm attacked, like there's some self thinking this is me, and then I would
Mhm.
say, well, like this isn't wholesome. I'm gonna let go of that. But the aggregate could still be there. That doesn't necessarily. That's not bad. That's just how it is.
All right. Let us
But
say that if we are unaware of anger and react in an angry way and therefore get anger and angriness as feedback, then in that feedback loop, anger can last a long time.
mhm.
However, once you recognize, and you can very quickly to recognize, I am not that anger. That anger is merely something that's in the body mind complex right now, but it's not me.
Yeah.
That's in fact what we're practicing in Anapanasati when we wake up and say, aha, I see you. Aha, I see you are not me.
Yeah.
I'm angry, which means the anger's got me. But when I come out, aha, I see you, Myra. That is a disjointedness or a disconnection to recognize, oh, I'm not angry. Anger is there, but I'm not angry. I'm the one who is seeing the anger now. Before I was in it, but now I'm not.
Yes. And we can do that component by component, think thought
Component
by
by
thought,
component, moment by moment, thought
moment
by
by
thought,
moment.
I am not that.
We can look at, yeah, we can reflect on the self. We can understand that we are not that. We're not pain or like, we're not
I'm
like
not that
ugly
pain.
or,
I'm not that anger. I am not that racist bigot when I have racist bigot thoughts.
and yeah, we're not saying I am that. We're saying I am not that.
I am not that.
And as far as wholesomeness goes, oh, well, I imagine like, yeah, if we're able to attach to wholesomeness, then yeah, like the self would kind of dissolve because it's our attachments with
That in
these
fact,
things, like
exactly
the
right, when
perverted, or
things
like
are
the,
wholesome, then the selfishness dissolves. That
yeah.
you could go so far as to say that unwholesome things are generally things we're selfish about.
Hmm.
Like like those people are voting for the wrong guy, therefore they're bad, and I
Yeah, and
have the right and the opportunity to go hurt them. This is
yes.
okay. So that kind of mentality is quite common nowadays, but it's always been there in humanity in the sense of I don't like it, therefore my anger is right and correct, and it is proper for me to go do harm.
Hmm.
But when we recognize, oh, wait a minute, I'm just being selfish right now because I'm attached to my own anger. If I see anger itself is unwholesome, then I can deal with my own anger without having to, let us say, get a Gatling gun
Yeah, like
to,
we've
to
made this self
demonstrate
up
it.
to like answer some question that like we can't solve, some like ignorance or whatever. We come up with the answer. The answer would be like unwholesomeness. Is like go do the anger.
Hmm.
And so in our minds, it's like, yeah, this is the correct thing to do. But if we like reflect on these, we reflect on the self, we would understand that we are not these things, and those the unwholesome action wouldn't arise.
Exactly. So, this is a way that we can begin to incorporate these teachings within the practice of anapanasati, is to start using the mind in wholesome ways to reflect upon these five aggregates. I am not this body. I
Yes.
am not these feelings. I am not this consciousness, but it's just there as part of the mechanism. These are part of the aggregates that I used to confuse with me. And now
Okay.
I recognize none of these things are me.
This makes a lot more sense because I feel like the past couple of times we've talked have been like, tell me what to think about so that it's wholesome. But you're telling me it's like, no, there's not like a trick. Like I shouldn't just be like thinking about cute puppies. It's like we're reflecting on like what's like the unwholesomeness that's present, and
Hmm.
by looking at our relationships with those, and understanding that we are not those, then
Yes.
wholesomeness can arise. Like we were giving space for wholesomeness to arise because you're never telling me like these things are wholesome. It's more like these are factors of like wholesomeness, or like I don't know,
Hmm.
maybe like reflecting on the Dhamma is like a wholesome thing to do, but it's not like you can't give me a list of like wholesome things to think about. Is that kind of true, or like
Yes.
okay?
Yes, that's exactly right. So, as we progress in this, we'll begin to understand how the mind itself actually works, that winds us up into this state of selfishness,
Yeah,
which is actually into a state of being dissatisfied.
and that's the Samapada. That's the kind of the what's
This
it
is
called?
Paticca, right?
Paticca
Paticca
Samuppada.
Samuppada.
That kind of is that's the scripture like detailing
That's the
the
step by step sequence of events that takes us through our life of basically going from uh, having a sensational input, processing it with old garbage, and coming up with something that's tainted.
yes.
And then that's what we have as our, let us say, uh, new constructed reality that's based upon garbage. And then that's what impacts us or hits us or contacts us, giving rise to feelings.
Hmm. Yeah,
All right.
wonderful. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
All right. So this is the state that we're talking about with Paticca Samuppada. And in fact, the Pali is there. Jiva is ignorant. Sankara, we've already just kept that as Sankara. Then Vinaya is consciousness. Namarupa is the perception, leading that Namarupa with the Sankara into Salayatana. Now, the word Atana is actually the senses, but the Salayatana is the internal sense, the what we made of it.
Yes.
And that's what impacts us. And that impact is called Pasa. And Pasa gives rise to Vedana, the feelings. And if the feelings are ignorant, then it gives rise into thirst or tanha, wanting something, wanting things that we don't have. That this is basically the issue for all meditators. They're meditating because they want something they don't have.
Yeah,
We have to
that's true.
immediately get them into, no, get yourself out of wanting something you don't have and start enjoying this present moment and be satisfied with it.
Yeah.
Okay, so tanha is that thirst. We want something. I want enlightenment, or I want a past life experience, or I want a God in my lap, or Jesus in my heart, or whatever it is that we want. That's the thirst.
Yeah. And we can look at that
Okay,
first. And
and
we
that
can
thirst.
say,
Okay,
that's
and
not
so
me. Yeah.
and the rest. That tanha leads to upadana, which is the clinging, and that clinging then leads to the four woeful states. And that leading is called bhava, and then being born into that woeful state, like anger itself, is in fact that's the self that's born in that hell of anger, and that's dukkha.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the order it goes is the jiva, sankara, sanya, namarupa, salayatana, pasa, vedana, tanha, upadana, bhava, jati, dukkha.
Oh,
12.
wow. Okay. Yeah. That's very, and yeah, I mean, I like, it seems very consistent. All the way from like when we first started talking about the
Once
Four
you
Noble
understand
Truths.
the process, you say, my goodness, the Buddha was smart. How could he have figured that out? Well, he sat down and he had a mind that had already been partially trained.
Mm-hmm.
And the whole linchpin to this is, aha, I see you, Mara. The waking up and recognizing that the mind has got hindrances in it. That's the big one.
Yeah.
Aha, I
Waking up,
see.
the mind has entrances that lets you do your investigation and come to these conclusions, I guess, that the Buddha did.
Okay. So now today's talk for a further talk on the deeper parts of Paticca Samuppada and in its integration. But the five aggregates are there within Paticca Samuppada. And in fact, that's the foundation of Paticca Samuppada. Without the aggregates, there would be no teaching of Paticca Samuppada. But the important point about the aggregates themselves is there is no self there anywhere. The self is manufactured,
Mm-hmm.
and that the manufacturing machine are these five aggregates. But the aggregate of but the self is not in that five aggregates. It's almost like an automobile factory. It's not an automobile with all those robots and all of that equipment in there, and all the computers and all of that stamping equipment. It's not a car.
Uh, yeah, like I guess like why not just okay, so like if we just change some of these ingredients of self or whatever, like we thinking of happy thoughts, like we wouldn't have a happy self arise. Because would that be
Generally, that's a good question, because generally what that means is that now that we're not going to be in our own selfish suffering, how we're going to deal with the world is going to be through the, let us say, the very high class way. Now, when I say high class way, I'm actually translating the word Brahma Vihara, because the word Vihara is like how do we dwell, or how do we live, or how do we stay, and we're going to stay high class. What are those things? Metta, Karuna, Mudita, Upekkha, or in English, we would say we're going to be kind to people, we're going to be compassionate and see what their situation is, we're going to spread our joy, Mudita, spreading sympathetic joy, and be able to handle anything.
so there wouldn't be a self there though, like we're talking about, right? These would just
No,
be like an
no, because
expression.
exactly here's a very easy example. Your brother. or someone close to you comes and wants to borrow something, not really, really big, let us say $500, and you say, no. Why is that? It's because I need that money.
Mm.
That's selfishness. And you tell him, no, I need that money. Now he feels bad and I feel bad. But if he comes and borrows $500 and I say, sure, it may hurt a little bit, but I've got it. Here it is. And he's happy and I'm happy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Which one of those episodes was selfish? The telling him, no, I won't give you the money, or yes, you can have it, which is selfish?
I don't know. It depends. It's
Huh?
kind of a trick question.
Well, it's not a trick question because you can throw the trickiness into it in the sense, well, will I get my money back? Because you might not. But that's
Yeah.
not the issue.
Yeah, but I guess like why would you be giving him the money? I guess would be like, yeah, if you decide yes,
Because
I'm
you
giving you the
love
money,
him.
you could still give him the money.
Because he needs it. Let us say that he needs that money, that you know he needs it, that he'll lose his job if he doesn't get his car fixed.
I mean, yeah, in perfect conditions, I could see, yeah, it's definitely a wholesome action. But like, what if you didn't have any money to give? Like, would you go take out a loan to give to him? Would that be the wholesome action? Or
Well, you're
like,
getting too
would that
deep in
be?
the weeds with that in the
No, I
sense
see what you
that
mean.
if
Yeah,
you are generous to somebody and you say yes and you give them a gift, that's not being selfish.
yeah, agreed.
But if
Yes,
you refuse them of something that they need because of your own fears or
uh,
your own self interest, then there's
yeah,
that selfishness. There it is.
yeah. It's like the prodigal son, or whatever. The story of the prodigal son. It's like,
Hmm.
yeah, your son comes back and he's like made a lot of mistakes, and you give him
But
your
the
best
dad's
robe.
really happy to see him, but
Yeah,
the other brother is jealous.
yeah,
Okay, so the father then is acting unselfishly when the prodigal son comes home, but the brother is being selfish.
yeah. But I guess you're saying that the self wouldn't be there. Like, there's not a self giving that person money at that point, right? In this situation,
Well,
that would just
again,
be
you're
an
making it
expression
too
of
hard. Let's go
compassion.
back instead of thinking about us, because we've kind of already defined the fact that there's not a soul.
Okay,
Right?
yeah, I guess I see what you mean. Like, we could construct something that would then like
But an
interact with this world
attitude.
and then give them money.
Mhm.
Sorry, yeah, I'm thinking about it too.
But the attitude of I need this, the attitude of no, you can't have it, that's being selfish.
Yes, the
Giving
idea
him
that
what he's
yes, we should
asking
give you the
for.
money because that would like you need this. That's arising because we've been able to, reflect on our attachments, like reflect on
Hmm.
like ourself. Like yes, it's making those actions possible in like a wholesome way. Is that a better way of putting it?
All right. So one way that you can look at it would be that, oh, well, I've got plenty of money. I've got $10,000 easy. So
Yeah,
500, that's easy to depart with. And
yeah,
so you see there's no selfishness there. Well, what if I don't have 5,000 or 10,000? Maybe I've only got 600. And now I give 500 away. Uh-oh, now it's getting close to the bone. It's getting close to me.
yeah.
You see where, okay, that's where the selfishness
So the
comes from.
greed's kicking in. Yeah,
The greed is coming up, and the greed now is manifesting in telling your brother, no, you can't have the loan, or no, you can't have $500. And that's dukkha for everybody. He's disappointed, and you didn't get any of the benefit of the joy of giving him $500. So both of us have lost out. But if I
yeah.
give him the money, that in fact, if I only had 600 and I gave him 500 of it, then that would be even more joyful. That if
Yes.
I had 10,000 and I gave him 500, then that's not a big loss. There's no big deal. But if I,
Yeah, I think I was just getting pedantic. Yeah, I was just thinking about like I don't know what we've been talking about and how like there's a self arising, And I guess we talked about like, yeah, maybe in our deepest meditations is something that like self-dissolves, but in the day-to-day, like we're reconstructing, like we're like changing around these attachments so that these like wholesome attitudes or like these Brahma Viharas, like that's how our self is expressing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that there will like enter some magical state where like I'm I don't know, unconsciously navigating the world and just like enacting good. Like I guess in the normal, I don't know. Do you kind of get what
Well,
I'm
you're
going
right
at?
on that. We have been navigating our through the world unconsciously, and also, let us say, causing problems from time to time because we don't recognize this thing that's going on inside the mind.
Yeah, we'll
One.
have the awareness of these machinations, like the way our mind's working, and like
Mm-hmm.
how these things are arising, so that like we're not like ruled by the three poisons and Mara and all that.
Right. So there's another way of stating it then, and that is that the one he who knows how his own mind works has more self-confidence. Even though there's no self there, there's still confidence.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And he who does not know his own mind very well is stuck in trepidation. He's
Yes.
stuck in the future. All right. So if you know how your mind works, and your brother or your good friend comes and asks for $500, you can think about it and say, if I say yes, everybody will be happy, and if I say no, everybody's going to be miserable. My choice, because I'm thinking about it, I'm looking at it, I'm investigating the situation.
Yeah,
Most people don't do that. They look at the money and they
I'm
say,
yeah,
huh?
yeah, I'm just stuck in like that magical thinking mode of like I will enter this state, which I guess we've already talked about it, like nothingness not being like a state really. It's kind of it's like an absence.
It's just an
And I'm
absence.
trying to
Right?
think like, oh, like maybe I'll go into some magical mode where like I'm just doing all these things for like exactly the right reasons because I'm just like a pure wisdom machine. But we're just talking about we're investigating how our mind works. Like
Just
if we
exactly.
understand that, then we can like understand how these like unwholesome like our suffering arises and be like, well, there's this other path to not suffering. And yeah, in
Precisely.
that case, like yeah, we can give them some money. Like yeah, like does
And
that
so
make
we take the
sense?
magic out of it. Yeah, let's take that all of that magical thinking out of it and recognize, no, if we investigate, we can see in certain cases, if I make one choice that's selfish and everybody is suffering, and the other choice that I can make is a non-selfish choice where everybody has benefit.
Yes. Okay. Thanks. That helps a ton. Yeah, I've been trying to think about like that magic bullet all week, or just like, I don't know how to describe it. Just like, I don't know, thinking I figured it out, or like, ooh, like what ingredients do we need to add so that like I just like am in pure bliss all the time. But we're kind of just talking about the way the world works, the way our mind works, like how the self is constructed.
Bliss ain't pure, it's got a structure.
Yeah.
It's not just skin, it's got bones.
Yeah. Yes.
So, we will talk about this a little bit more in detail. This is just barely getting things going, and so this is why we talk about the five aggregates first, because we have to get that foundation. That I have actually done a bit of research. Actually, I didn't have to do the research. All I had to do was just look up everything that was in a particular endnote that Bhikkhu Bodhi had already done for us, to find out that there are more than a dozen places where the five aggregates are in the Majjhima Nikaya, and in all cases, it has only one point. There's only one point to these five aggregates,
Oh,
and
really?
that is that there is no self in any one of those components of those five aggregates. There
Okay.
is no self in feelings. I am not my anger. I am not the body. If I were the body, if the body was really mine, then I could be a girl today and a horse tomorrow and a changeling all over the place. I could, even Jesus talks about it. You cannot change your stature even 1 inch.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot be old today and young tomorrow. You can't do it. The
Oh, well,
body does
okay.
not belong to you.
Yeah.
That's kind of hard for people to get. The body doesn't belong to me. And then we recognize, wait a minute, the feelings don't belong to me either. That in fact, if there's anything, that feelings own me. When anger comes, I've got no choice about it.
Oh, wow. Hmm.
Until we
Yeah, that's
gain some
interesting because I
skills.
do feel like yeah, like whenever I do feel like those are my things. Like if I'm angry, it's like I am angry. It's not like
I
this
am
anger is
angry.
happening to me or like this
Right. This thing is
other way
right.
around.
But this anger is not me. I am not this anger. I am not this sadness. And that's really freeing when to recognize that I am not that anger. And I won't draw out of it.
Yeah.
That whole point that I'm making. I am not that anger.
Hmm.
I'm the one pointing. I am not the anger that's grabbed me. This is so begin to see that is true in all cases for feelings and for thoughts and for everything, that you are not that thought, which means you can change it right now. You can make these changes in this moment.
And we change it by forgetting, or like, yeah.
Yeah, well, you can change it by changing your attitude. You
Oh,
can
sorry.
change
Yeah,
it
change your
basically.
attitude.
The question then is, well, when do you make this change? The answer is whenever I remember.
Okay, we can remember that we
And
can change because
and
these things
when
are.
And when sati is unremitting, that means that I can make a lot of changes because I keep remembering to change,
Mhm.
to not go by that old way. Let's also take an investigation. Look, is this the right way to do it, or is this going to lead to suffering?
Yeah, and we can change because of these relationships. We can change our relationship to them, I guess. So
Right.
we can investigate that. We can be like, okay, well, like I'm not that feeling.
I am
So
not.
that's not a part of me. And so, yeah, no longer am I sad.
So I can, you see, when we think I am angry, then that means that it's overwhelming and it's got control, and who knows when it's going to be over.
Yeah.
When I recognize I am not my anger, that means out you go.
Yeah. That makes sense. And it makes sense that if I was like continuing to feel sad, then like I'm still identifying with that to an extent. Or like I still
Mhm.
believe that I am that.
Excellent, excellent. All right. Well, I don't have any actual instructions of how to apply this to
Okay.
meditation, other than to recognize that thinking about the five aggregates and the Four Noble Truths is wholesome kind of thinking.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, I'll think about them. And yeah, I mean, that'll help my investigation a ton.
Excellent. All right. Well, we'll see you in a few days then, and we'll
All right.
continue on with it.
All right. Have a good evening.
Okay. We'll see you. Bye bye.
Bye.